if you ever want to do a really fun study in accents, I recommend take a trip with your wife and go there. Have a fun weekend and just sit there and pretend you're Professor Higgins and listen to people.
I could probably maybe I can make it a business expense. I'll go to like Lanso Meadow in Newfoundland and then do it.
Yeah, that's true. I have to say though, Lanza Meadow is not very exciting.
Okay.
It's one I don't because people, and as you know, as you well know, lots of people will try to cry up the site and say, "Oh, this was Finland," and then when you actually see it, you're like, "It's a boat shed." It's
Like it's
very
still
nice.
cool.
It's still very cool. It's still fantastic. It's very nice. But it's and the air the actual museum part is lovely, but the site itself, it's one shed, two possibly slave enclaves, a ditch where there was really poor ore that they were very obviously trying to work, and probably some kind of a fi boat fixing shed, and that's all that was there. They
But
were there for maximum 8 years, and then they fucked off. So
that's so much more real, right?
yes,
I mean, like I was just like last week, I was just in Alexandria, Minnesota, where they house the
uh,
Kensington Runestone.
yes.
And like just the way that people have tried to build this thing up and turn it into this whole narrative of, these guys bristling with weapons, for some reason going deep into Minnesota. Um, like it's just, I feel like if somehow, for some reason, Norse speakers had pushed that far, A, they would have done it from Greenland, not from Norway or Sweden, like that thing claims they did.
Hmm.
And B, it would have been, a larger, poorer party than that, right? It would have been people who actually, it's hard for me to imagine what the motivation would be to go that deep inland because you're not even established on the coast. Why do you do that? But
Yeah, Lancer Meadow is definitely not a colony, and not
yeah,
obvious. So obviously, if that's not a colony, Minnesota couldn't be. And it was very obviously populated by a handful of people probably fixing boats. It was probably some kind of a fixing station because there's ore there, and it's very poor in quality. And so they probably realized, wow, this place is shit, and just decided to leave.
yeah. I mean, that does make it possible that the Vinland described in the sagas is somewhere south of there.
Yeah, it has to be somewhere else. It can't be that. Yeah.
But, the sagas, it's like trying to find the sagas are written 200 years after all that. So it's like the descriptions are so hard to follow and match with anything. There's one of those two sagas has one paragraph of decent description that even describes when the sun rose and set on the winter solstice, I think,
Hmm.
which actually gives you some latitude to work with. But the latitude is so broad that you get that it could be like Maine, you know, and that's not very likely. Um, I read one interesting paper maybe 15, 16 years ago that suggested that some of the confusion in the description is because they actually went a little ways down the St. Lawrence and they didn't realize that they were in a
So what you're
in,
saying is Montreal is really a Viking community. That's what you're saying. That's why
no,
Assassin's Creed is made here.
yeah, maybe. No, but Quebec City is maybe within the realm of as far as, you might push,
I
right?
think
Because
it's a
doesn't
little too far south. A little bit too, because it's not near the St. Lawrence mouth.
hmm. Yeah, but I mean, whatever the case, like clearly they got to some part of Canada. They at least got to Newfoundland, but the sagas are so difficult to use as evidence. Um,
They are not historical features at all. And to that point, I took a picture and I wanted to show you this. I don't know if you saw this yesterday, but because we had to defer our meeting by a day, I actually got to take this beautiful picture. So I saw this and I went, "Oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever seen."
oh Jesus. I mean wow. So
Your face says it all.
so let me
I,
can I
I
can I screen share here? So
absolutely.
like just taking a look at this. We got so it's like So it's Ayas.
It's not, that's not even, that's Vegvisir.
Oh, is it Vegvisir? I
It's
can never tell these two
Vegvisir.
things apart. But surrounded by the like not work thing, and then it's got the Aurora. I don't know why the Aurora is such a big thing on these book covers. Did I start that trend,
I don't think so,
or
no.
am I just part of this trend? Um, oh my God, it looks so.
I snapped this and I said I have to show you. So this is so obviously it's Vegvisir and the biggest mistake that P and I see Vegvisir all over the place when it comes to Viking stuff. Vegvisir is not Viking. It's not runes. It's not Vi it's a Christian stave, Icelandic Christian stave from the Book of Hold. And whenever I see this, I go, and then of course the around it is the Celtic insular design. And I just thought this was tip top.
It's pretty tip top. I mean they use a lot of knots and stuff, but it doesn't usually look like that.
No.
Also, I think it's pretty funny. Like it includes a book. It gives you the page count, so it doesn't even have anything to brag about except the page count, right? That's already a bad sign. And it's like, and a cloth bag. Like, I could probably get another one. I don't need your crappy little cloth bag. I don't know. These things, it's kind of astonishing just how much crap there is out there about runes. I read some of this stuff a long time ago because someone asked me to contribute the chapter about runes to a book that was going to be kind of an encyclopedia of pseudo archaeology.
Oh, nice.
It unfortunately never got made,
No.
but I so I'm like, oh crap, I've got to actually read some of this pseudo rune stuff. So I just went to Amazon and I searched runes and I ordered the top three books. So I have read some, and it is not firmly rooted in reality.
Yeah.
And I remain like I still have this sort of irritation that drives me from, 17 years ago when I read these books, that I think comes out pretty strongly when I talk about this stuff and has sometimes led to interesting interpretations of my attitude toward runes. Like, I was just at this Viking festival in Minnesota and there was someone who was sort of upset with me.
That's
I
going to
was,
happen.
yeah, I know. It's not the worst example of this.
It's like me in the Celtic side. It's going to happen.
It's believe me, I've dealt with some negative interactions, but this wasn't that bad. But this person was saying like, oh, I can't believe you say that runes um, aren't magical. I'm like, this is not exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is go to Barnes and Noble or Amazon or whatever and look at books about runes, and they don't know what they're talking about.
Hmm.
They are not like I cannot carve one of these letters and it means, this magical effect. That is not how ancient or medieval people understood it. I do not claim that they did not think that writing itself was not somewhat magical and could have magical effects, but those magical effects had more to do with what you wrote than the just single isolated symbol. And also, we don't know what all their attitudes and ideas about that were, right? We still read a lot of inscriptions that we don't understand.
Hmm.
Could those be magical? I mean, or is that just the sort of classic anthropological, like, we don't understand it, it's magical? Like I think they probably did have a lot of ideas about writing being magical. I just don't think that our 19th, 20th, 21st century interpretations of that are likely to be reliable indicators of the ancient and medieval attitude.
And we do have but both you and I are great debunkers, but I like the way you deal with it because you're much more pedantic than I am. I just go, well, it's the
Is that
Victorians'
good?
fault.
Am I, wait, is the pedantry good? I don't.
I
I,
think so because you've got your sources. I mean, obviously, I always present information with sources, but my sources are always the Victorians said this without any evidence whatsoever, and therefore we can take that grain of salt and we can flick it into into the universe.
and unfortunately, with Viking and rune stuff, sometimes it's a Nazi said this. Um, like it it's
Yeah.
pretty surprising, actually, the degree to which a lot of modern interpretations of this stuff are based on German fellows who went that way. And
I know you'll like him for different reasons because I know you'll be at me for Grimm's Law, but Jacob Grimm is one of those people I would love to punch in the face. if I ever.
Yeah, kind
So,
of. Kind
so
of. Yeah. I mean, for the folklore side, maybe not so much for the language side, although on the language side, he is not necessarily really the discoverer of Grimm's Law, because Rasmus Rask from Denmark actually articulated that before him.
so
So
what you're saying is we're free to punch Jacob Grimm in the
yeah, maybe I
face.
would.
Yeah, I
No,
would
I'm
definitely would. With his Deutsche mythology, I definitely would, sir. And
I,
his whole like, oh yes, the Easter bunnies, I don't understand it, so it must be pagan.
oh
Odin
my
and
God.
Woden are the same god because of course they are. You just go, oh God.
Well, like, see, that's something where it's like, yeah, Odin Woden, it's the same name. Presumably, West Germanic beliefs are similar to the recorded North Germanic beliefs, but yeah, how the heck do we know?
We don't know.
So,
We don't know. Also, as well, I mean, Woden is always depicted with two eyes.
is he depicted anywhere in an ancient?
In some depictions, he is depicted with he does have two eye. He's never depicted with one eye, Woden. So
Where I think you're right that in West Germanic and Old English, Old High German, Old Saxon, I don't think there's ever a mention of him having one eye.
nope, not
But
that
are
we
there
know
art
of. Not that we know of.
but are there artistic depictions?
There
Like,
are some that go all the way back on, I think, 17th century. But again, it's because we don't have anything that tells us that Woden had one eye. We don't know.
17th century is so late that I wouldn't put much stock in it one way or the other.
It's better than
But
Victorian. I'll give it that.
that's okay. I mean, that may be true.
If ever I see anything said by if it's got Sir James Fraser's name on it,
Yeah.
if it has Robert Graves' name on it, Lady Raglan, I know they're a little bit later, but still they were born onto that time. Just take it and throw it in the trash. That's it. Especially if it has anything to do with druids.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear the name Robert Graves. I don't want to hear the name White Goddess. I don't want to hear it.
Oh, no. And Norse myth stuff is kind of the same, although England and Germany were way weirder about the stuff than Scandinavia. Scandinavian scholars from the Victorian period are a lot more restrained most of the time. Um, but yeah, the English and German ones can just be like, oh man, I'm in for a trip. Like, and they go off on these freaking tangents connecting everything to everything. And like at the end of the day, like you get this concluding chapter of some book, and it's like none of this references reality. Right? Like, it's
No,
all
it's
built.
like it's the same thing on the Celtic side. We just go, what, why do you think that Bridget, the saint never existed? Why do you think that it was erased by a god? We don't even have any evidence of Bridget worship at all, ever. The first time she's mentioned is in the Middle Ages. So why would you think one over the other? And it's really just because some Victorian said so. That's it.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
go, okay, all right, two people can't have the same name. I
But
don't
isn't it
know.
weird? Like, how is it that in 2026, we are still obsessed with how Victorians presented the late antiquity and the early Middle Ages? Like how did that become the time
Nationalism.
that yeah, I guess that's part of it. But it's like,
That is really what it was. If you think about Jacob Grimm and what he was doing, it all had to do with in his instance German nationalism
yeah,
and the getting together of these nation states which didn't exist before. You know, now we're German, now we're Italian, now we're this because all of these concepts didn't exist really before that time.
hmm,
And when all these nation states started happening, so for example, in the case of the if infamous fraudster Yola Morganig, who completely invented Druid holidays that didn't exist and claimed that he had this crazy Druid text, in the reason he did these things, which we know are frauds, and even in his time they knew were frauds, because he wanted Wales to be a nation again. He wanted
hmm,
them, and so he did a lot to preserve the Welsh language that people do remember him for and thank him for. But then he came up with this whole like backstory of druids and celebrating Albanarthand and all these things. You just go, "Well, where did you get this?" And he admitted later that obviously he invented it. It wasn't real because he was trying to link things like Christmas to the druids and the druids to Wales. And so that's where a lot of these things come from.
yeah. And I guess because like these writers often were fairly talented writers, right? I mean, like they knew how to compel the reader. I guess that, and because we often want to believe, these stirring national romances, I guess that's part of what's kept a lot of these ideas alive, even when people really aren't necessarily reading that 19th century source anymore. They're just reading, the website or the ChatGPT summary or whatever.
Oh
But
God, it's the worst. The Irish Tourist Board last year was like, Halloween is a 2,000-year-old holiday invented by Druids, and I just went, I need to have a conversation with somebody. I need to. Speaking
but
of which, today at least is a Saint Jean Baptiste, which is the midsummer. And so, as you well know, Vikings did not celebrate midsummer, or at least we have no evidence from any Old Norse source. The
yeah, I was
Viking
gonna say
people.
like it's another one of those things where I have to say I just don't know if they did,
We
right?
have
But
no
people,
evidence. There's no evidence from Viking sources that they thought it was a particularly special day. Maypoles and the poles for midsummer have nothing to do with the Vikings, have nothing to do with fertility. They were used many other times during the year for holidays, and they just now become associated with May Day and midsummer, but they were not always that way. We didn't even there was no mention of midsummer in a Scandinavian context anywhere until 930 AD in Sweden. So this whole concept of midsummer is fairly, well, to say modern, but
did you say
fairly.
nine? Wait, 9:30?
930 AD is the first time that the word midsummer is used as a holiday, and it's in English,
Oh, okay. I
or
was gonna say like
no no.
I was gonna
Um,
say there's nothing.
yeah, so
So,
for
but,
specifically for talking about the Scandinavian bride procession. And that's the first time, at least, that we know about it in a Scandinavian context, people talking about it in a Scandinavian context. With regard to the sagas, there is a mention of a midsummer block, but again, we have
oh,
no
is there
idea.
somewhere?
It's mentioned in one saga, but there's no they don't talk about a holiday. There's no big thing. But and we only think this really because of modern pagans, where they celebrate Litha, but that name was invented by Aidan Kelly in the 1960s for the calendar, for the Wiccan calendar. He invented it because he took that word from Bede, and Bede
Oh,
said
that's
that
right.
Bede said that the Anglo-Saxons, he just said that the Anglo-Saxons called the 2 month summer period Erleither. That was it. There's no holiday anything. So in a German context, we have no, or Germanic context rather, we have no midsummer anything until Middle
Those are
Ages.
the month names that J.R.R. Tolkien used for the hobbits.
That's right, yeah.
I got from Bede, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he lives so heavily from Bede. But actually, so we for the language part, let's talk about let's we've got a bunch of questions from some people because
Okay.
they knew you were going to be here. So these are these are things that obviously you've talked about before, but where did Old Norse originate exactly? Do we know the exact point somewhere in Scandinavia where Old Norse originated? And how many dialects of Old Norse were there?
I mean, if you want to talk about the ultimate origination point, we would have to say, roll it all the way back to Proto-Indo-European 5,000 years ago,
Di-
which, is that what they mean, or do they mean distinguishing Old Norse from other Germanic languages?
Distinguishing Old Norse from other Germanic languages, because I know if we say that, we're going to get somebody's going to sniff in the comments going, but what do you mean Proto-Indo-European is theoretical? We don't have any records.
Well, I mean, all these proto-languages are theoretical, and Proto-Indo-European, if that's a theory, gravity is a theory, right? I mean, like it's solidly reconstructible. But as far as it is distinguishing Old Norse, or we can say North Germanic, Scandinavian languages from other Germanic languages, I think probably they are distinct sometime in the final century BC, because it's very likely that Goths speaking Gothic are in Eastern Europe by the first century AD. And so they're separate from the speech community in Scandinavia by that point. And when we read the Gothic Bible written in the mid 300s, it's very similar to the Proto-Norse language we see in runestones in Scandinavia at the same time, but it's also changed, and so has the Scandinavian. So there's a few centuries of change separating them.
Mm,
With West Germanic, we're in a little bit of a weaker position, not as much attestation early on, but I think they also the differences between, say, Old Norse and Old English reflect the separation point about that same time, maybe a little bit later. Probably, in the first few centuries AD, it's still not necessarily really, really distinct languages, but kind of dialect areas that shade into each other. So you probably have dialects of what we can call Proto-English still on the continent, still somewhere around, Jutland, that are that shade closer into Proto-Norse, and dialects of Proto-English that shade closer into like Proto-Old Saxon. Um, but over time, especially after English moves to Britain, you're going to get these areas kind of getting a little more walled off from each other and developing more independently. How many dialects of Old Norse were there? Um, this is really hard to say. One confusing point is that some of our, or really kind of all of our Proto-Norse inscriptions and Elder Futhark stuff from the early centuries AD don't necessarily look perfectly like we would expect the ancestor of literary Old Norse to look.
mm,
So it's possible that there's more dialect diversity in Scandinavia early on than we realize, and that possibly what comes to be, you know, Old Norse, the language of the Vikings, represents one of those regions' uh, variants becoming a little bit more dominant and standardized around Scandinavia. But we're not actually seeing that variant very much early on. It's a possibility. I think Johann Schalin has worked on this question a little bit
mm.
and proposed that maybe um, some group, probably in today's Denmark, become culturally dominant enough that their variant kind of spread as a prestige North Germanic. Really hard to say. In the Viking Age, though, there are two major dialect areas because there's a distinct Old West Norse and a distinct Old East Norse, and they're not vastly different. You would have been able to understand one another, um, just as Norwegians and Swedes largely understand each other today. But you see a little bit of difference in the pronouns, a little bit of difference in verb inflection, a few different things like after the Viking Age, you get monoplongization in Old East Norse. But then by the literary period, 1200s, 1300s, we can speak of distinctive Icelandic versus Norwegian, and even West Norwegian versus East Norwegian versus Swedish, and even like Central Swedish versus not Central Swedish, and Danish. So it's starting to split into more recognizable dialect groups by the literary period. But I'm not
S-
sure that it had split that much in the Viking Age.
So in the literary period, which texts were written in which dialects, or is there a distinct written dialect versus sound change?
Almost all of our literary Old Norse texts that people want to read are in Old Icelandic. Occasionally, because a lot of the poetry has been passed down from earlier centuries, occasionally the poetry will show the characteristics of another dialect, suggesting it was composed in that dialect. And typically, in that case, it looks like it's, more Norwegian uh, than Icelandic. Although occasionally with a text like Havamal, you actually have a couple dialect features that we don't know from elsewhere. So it looks like maybe kind of a lost dialect of Norwegian, which would make sense that there would have been variants that don't have descendants today. There is some stuff in Old Swedish. There's actually a fair amount of stuff in Old Gutnish from the island of Gotland. But so in Old Gutnish, there's the Gutta Saga, there's the laws of Gotland. In Old Swedish, you have a lot of law texts, some literature like saints' lives and things like that. In Old Danish, mostly legal texts, some old um, healing texts, leech books,
Hmm.
and in Old Norwegian, also a lot of laws, some sermons in Old Norwegian, and uh, at least one saga in Old Norwegian, Futhark saga. But if you take a big D20 and just roll it, and you say like you have to roll a critical 20 to find an Old Norse text. It's not an Old Icelandic, right? It's mostly Old Icelandic.
I love how you say the text that people want to read, and I like how you say the text that people don't want to read, or all or sermons.
Well, I mean, they're not interesting in and of themselves. I've read a lot of that stuff, not because it's like incredible literature, but just looking for like weird dialect features and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Um,
as a linguistic study, it's fascinating. But of
yeah,
course, as you say, with sermons, we all have to accept and understand that the Viking sagas were not written in the Viking Age or written down in the Viking Age.
yeah. Now, some of the poetry has linguistic features that suggest it is actually passed down from that period,
Hmm.
but not the prose. Um, the prose is very much of its own time, usually 1200s, 1300s. You get some 1100s prose in Icelandic. You get what's called the Stockholm Homily Book, which is actually from Iceland, but it's preserved in Stockholm, um, is quite archaic Old Icelandic prose
Mm.
from the late 1100s, but you don't get much else from that early.
And then the follow-up question is, so is there really any Viking literature that is pre-Christian?
Yeah, the poetry, not all the poetry, but a lot of the poetry, the Poetic Edda, and a lot of the poetry in the sagas. So for a long time, it's been accepted that a lot of skaldic poetry preserved in the sagas is, in fact, composed in the time it claims to have been composed in. Skaldic poetry is so complicated that it is very, very difficult to not make a pretty dateable stanza
Mm.
because so many things have to rhyme and alliterate that it often kind of only works in a particular century's window, right? Something would have changed to make this rhyme not work or this alliteration not work, and you can often kind of find it in that window. Um, and in the late 2010s, early 2020s, Christopher Sapp at Indiana, Leif Olson at Bergen, and then uh, me independently, I think all not knowing that we had the similar idea, thought, can we date Eddic poetry by counting certain the occurrence of archaic particles in skaldic poetry, figuring out the rate of occurrence in different centuries, and then comparing that to the rate of occurrence of those in Eddic poems. And you can actually find that from doing that, you can get a very tight kind of schedule, chronology of Eddic poetry and say, well, some of these are earlier than others. They're all Viking Age, or not all Viking Age. Some of them are post-Viking. Like it looks like in the Poetic Edda, for those familiar with it, that Horbarsljóð, where Thor and Odin insult each other, that's late. That's composed by a Christian, probably the 1100s. Same thing with Ríkisþula. Interestingly, the poem about Ríkr fathering the different classes of humans. But a lot of that poetry is really, really old, from usually the 900s. Some of them look extra archaic, like weirdly enough, Thrimskvi, the poem about Thor dressing up as a bride and getting his hammer back, looks like it could be like late 800s, um, which is kind of funny that like,
Yeah, it is.
the goofiest poem in the Poetic Edda may be one of the oldest. Um,
That would make I mean, I think that makes most sense because yeah, as long as you have things not being mucked about, you can write whatever you want.
well, and this is something that I found really fascinating about this new, more objectively based linguistic dating is that for centuries, um, people have largely tried to date these poems on literary grounds
Hmm.
by associating with people's literary taste. It's a lot harder to be objective about that, but it meant that a lot of the poems centered around women were regarded as being later because, of course, pagan Vikings don't have any interest in women's perspectives. That's a Christian thing. But in fact, it seems like the opposite is true. A lot of the most women-centered poems are actually that up by linguistic dating look the oldest, like Old Runar, the first poem of Gudrun. Um, Hamnesmal, I guess, still counts as a really old one. These have very uh, women-centered perspectives, which it's like, huh, okay, yeah, actually that makes plenty of sense. But it's funny that that was regarded as such a like point of faith that, yeah, Vikings weren't interested in women's perspectives.
Very interesting. People think that. I mean, even earliest saints, I mean, Bridget, the Saint Bridget, she's one of the earliest saints' lives that we know about. So
Hmm.
why wouldn't it be that way for the Viking people? That's kind of silly. I mean,
Yeah, and this
modern
notion that
perspective aside.
and this notion that you can't have pagans interested in women as active characters is weird. I mean, like, next month the Odyssey movie is coming out, right? Well, if you read the Odyssey, there's a whole lot of Athena. There's a,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Like it, and there's a whole lot of Penelope. Like there's actually pretty active women characters in a lot of these stories.
Hmm.
It's not something that's imposed by the new religion. If anything, it maybe reduces the number of active women characters in the medieval period. I don't know. Uh, at any rate, I'm more interested in dating these things by their language features than trying to figure out what people's tastes were. I just don't feel it's a very objective uh, thing I can determine.
So speaking of language features, what does the word rune mean?
Well, it's interesting because I think you can make a chronology here, and the slightly controversial position I'm going to start from here is that I think it is borrowed from Celtic. Not everybody agrees. Some people think that it's a
It's hands off.
well, like here's the thing, like among the community of rune scholars, nothing is a safe claim to make. People argue about everything. So if it's if it's not a borrowing, it's a cognate, but I think that it's pretty likely a borrowing. It looks exactly like you would expect this word to look if it had been borrowed from Gaulish or something really close to Gaulish in the last 2 centuries BC, which is lines up really nice and tight with our timeline for the earliest runic inscriptions, which the earliest we have is from late in the final century BC. And so what did it mean in the language they're borrowing it from? Well, earliest attested Celtic language with this word is Old Irish, rune, right? So secret, mystery. Would you disagree with that?
Oh, I don't disagree with that at all.
Okay. And I think the reason they're borrowing it is because what you write is a secret from a person who can't read, right? It's it's a secret message between you and the person who can read it. And in our earliest inscriptions, right, from the first centuries of runic inscriptions, rune does not mean the letter, it means the entire message.
Hmm.
So we have multiple inscriptions. I want to say 5 or 6, which is pretty good for early Elder Futhark, where someone says, I wrote the rune, right? It's not plural, it's the singular rune. And in the earliest, well, attested Germanic language in Gothic and the Gothic Bible in the mid 300s, um, rune is the like secret to, so it seems to still have that sense. And the word book is used in Gothic to actually mean the letter. So that's kind of cool, right? It's the same word we have, like, the book word.
Hmm.
So it looks like what's happening is that somewhere 1500 years ago or so, you have a fairly natural transition in these words where book becomes no longer the letter, but the text, and rune becomes no longer the text, but the letter, right? In a sense, these words sort of switch their semantics, um, which sounds weird, but I mean, it obviously happened based on the sort of flipped semantics in the Gothic Bible. Um, Now, in Old Norse, you still so in our literary texts or in our poetry from the Viking Age, then rune means the letter. Now, it doesn't mean the message like earlier, but you occasionally see it still means secret. Um, so, for example, um, one way to say like boyfriend or girlfriend in Old Norse is runi runa, the one that shares your secret, right? Your secreter, your whisper buddy almost. Um, and occasionally in poetry, you see um, bring someone to runes, this weird idiom, which is like talk to somebody. So that seems to kind of harken back to that earlier sense of like get someone to exchange messages with you because it's not written. It's like bring someone to runes is like talk to somebody. Um, so
And so
that's
what did Old Norse people though call their own script? Because for they didn't call it Elder Futhark, did they?
no, Futhark is a modern name for it, based on the first letters, right? Just like we call the alphabet because it's alpha, beta, gamma.
Mhm.
The runic alphabet starts Futhark, so that's why we call it that. No, so in Old Norse you would call runes, runar, um, and they call Roman letters bokstavir, bookstaves. So distinguishing more or less the medium on which they're carved. Interestingly, in Old Norse, you use different verbs for reading and writing runes than you use for reading and writing the Roman alphabet. So for reading and writing runes, you use the native words roda and rista, which are related to English read and write. But for reading and writing the Roman alphabet, you use lesa and skreva, which are, of course, related to German lesen and schreiben. But it's kind of interesting that you would use different verbs to describe the processes, and I guess it's probably because the media that are used for those different alphabets are different.
So what's its relationship to Gothic script?
This is another place where I'll make some slightly controversial remarks. I don't think super controversial. The alphabet used to write the Gothic Bible and other texts in Gothic um, is mostly based on Greek, mostly based on Greek uncial letters uh, of the time, so the 300s AD. So similar to Cyrillic, right? Cyrillic is based largely on Greek script, but just like Cyrillic, there are sounds that Gothic has that can't be reflected by uh, Greek uncials at the time. And so I'll say Wolfula for convenience, even though, of course, who knows if it was really Wolfula, the one person who invented this alphabet. But Wolfula takes F, I think from runes. Some people will say from the Roman alphabet, but I think that it's consistent with him knowing runes. Uses the inverted U of runes, takes what looks like a variant that we do see on a lot of early inscriptions of thorn to write the th sound. And those are the three letters that look most like runes. And I think it's interesting that those are the three letters that are the first three letters of the runic alphabet. So I wonder if the idea there was I'm teaching people to read and write this new alphabet, and they already know runes. So I'm going to teach them in the runic order, and I'm going to make sure the first three look really familiar, just to sort of like start you off in the shallow end of the pool, um, or just to make it look reasonably familiar to someone who knows runes, while still making it look sort of civilized by largely being Greek-like in look. The two really surprising things about Gothic script are that there's a letter for the hua sound, right? The cool whip sound. And there's a letter for the qua, right? Not the ka in QU, but the whole thing, the sequence qua. And we do not know really other source alphabets that definitely used letters for those two distinct sequences, or well, isn't really a sequence, but it's often perceived as one. It is possible that actually in very early runes there were letters that stood for those sounds. Um, I speculate that that could have been the case, and that's where Wolfilla got the idea, because there are letters that we don't actually have a clear idea of the meaning of in runes, or the earliest runes, Elder Futhark, but I can't prove it. Unfortunately, our sources are so meager that we don't have inscriptions that would include these letters being used that way. But maybe one day, and maybe Wolfilla just came up with those letters on his own. But uh, if it was Wolfilla, the single person, we know from two sources that talk about his life that he knew Latin, so he could have drawn on the Greek alphabet, the Latin alphabet, and the runic alphabet. Goths knew runes. There are runic inscriptions in Gothic. So, you know, he drew on at least Greek and one other alphabet, and I think it's more likely he drew on runes because the the Futh looks like the Futh of runes, and I think he would do that if you were teaching someone who already knew runes to write a new alphabet. How's
So
that?
what's the relationship between old later runes and Old English?
Old English runes. Old English runes add some letters, and there are some sound changes that make some old letters now mean new things. So most notably in that first sequence, Futhark, the ah. So they learn the rune sounds from their names. They have acrophonic names. They start with the sound of the letter. So the fourth letter is called Ansus, God, the singular of Old Norse Asir, like the family of gods that includes Odin, and Proto-Germanic. But that word has become os in Old English. So now that fourth letter means O, so they make a new A letter. So there's some changes like that. There's also some letters where, they decide um, new meanings for them. In particular, there's the one rune in the middle that is used as a vowel and as a consonant as, like five different things in Old English inscription. So it's clear they had forgotten what it originally meant, and we're just trying to like find something new to use it for. Uh, but yeah, Old English runes are largely uh, a logical continuation of Elder Futhark with some modifications just from sound change and from them occasionally adding a letter or two.
What do you think the relationship is between runic inscript runes and runic inscriptions and Ogam or Oam?
I don't think it's a direct relation. Um, there could be, in one sense, a pretty indirect relation. For one thing, the scripts don't look the same.
No, not at
There's
all.
no visual uh, continuity between them. Their ordering is not the same, but it is interesting that they both are reordered. And it is interesting that the letters of both alphabets have meaningful names. So, I wonder if there is some thread of connection just in that, although the names aren't the same, the notion of naming them and the notion of mixing up the order could be distantly related. So, the Phoenician alphabet, the Greek alphabet, the Roman alphabet, they all have mutatis mutandis the same order, right? Aleph, Beth, Gamma, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, ABC. Runes don't, Ogham doesn't. Um, and in Greek, you have names for the letters, but they're not meaningful, right? Alpha, Beta,
Hmm.
Gamma are just pronunciations of the Phoenician names that do mean something in Phoenician, but not in Greek. And then Romans just call them by their sound, a, be, ke, same thing we do now. But runes have meaningful names, money, wild ox, thorn, etc. And that idea comes from somewhere. And a couple of the names do look potentially Celtic, which connects with my notion that maybe the word rune itself is borrowed, and maybe the runes are actually borrowed from a Celtic speaking people. They look a lot like the script used for Lepontic, Celtic language in the Alps. So maybe both Ogham and runes owe something to some ancient Celtic intermediating culture, perhaps Lepontic people or um, a close Gaulish speaking people or something like that, that had names for their letters and had mixed up the order of them. But I don't think, other than that shared foundation in some intermediating ancient Celtic culture, that there's a direct connection between poem and runes. Um, to be clear, I am not a Celticist. So there may be people with, um, deeper familiarity with Ogham who would disagree with my characterization of Ogham. And to them, I apologize. My familiarity with Old Irish and such is pretty generalist Indo-Europeanist familiarity with it.
I should have asked Dr. Danny Bate when he was here because his specialty is Old Irish, but we had touched on it very briefly when he was here, and we talked. Both of us said, "Well, it can't be that old because Ogham or Ogham or or Ogham, however you'd like to pronounce it, um, is it was they wrote primitive Irish in it, and it also was made to you could also write Latin in it, so it can't be older than that. And it's interesting to see how people are like, no, it has to be an ancient Celtic thing. Well, maybe it was based on a previous system, but
Yeah,
we currently don't have evidence for it. So,
because the earliest known, so David Stifter is at Maynooth University in Ireland, the world's premier scholar of ancient Celtic. And I rely a lot on him for my understanding of this stuff. But as I understand it from him, the earliest Celtic language written down is Lepontic.
mhm,
And the earliest records there, I think there's some disagreement about the dating, but before 500 BC,
mhm.
which is pretty freaking early for Western Europe. Um, I don't remember about Ogham, but I don't I don't know if there are inscriptions before the 80 centuries. Are there
No,
BC inscriptions?
no,
Okay.
not that we found, but
Yeah,
no,
right.
there.
Well, that's always the thing too, is people say, well, you just haven't found it, which, like, unfortunately, that is semi-valid, right? Like, because I was just saying myself, well, maybe these letters were used for something different and we just don't have inscriptions where they're used. But it's like we know those letters are there because they're writing them out in the entire alphabet. We just don't know how they're used. So I'm making a, I think, somewhat more restrained claim. We don't see these letters used. Let us see them used before we decide what they're being used for. And I think it's fair to say, okay, any given script, maybe actually, I think you can say 2, 3 centuries older than its first inscriptions. You don't know because it can take a while before somebody decides to put it on something that's not perishable.
Hmm.
Maybe you're making memorial, not stones, but putting up memorials for people, but they're wood, right? So it may take a while before anyone's putting on something that's not perishable. And just 3 years ago, um, the earliest securely datable runic inscription uh, was announced, and that's 2 centuries earlier than the previous one.
Hmm.
So like it does happen. But if you're saying something is 5,000 years earlier than the first inscriptions, like that's it's just too much.
No, it's
Um,
too far. It's too much. I mean, there's plenty of stuff that we don't know that we're still trying to parse out. For example, what does the word Yule mean?
yeah, yeah. No, that's huge. Um, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't think it's related to wheel, um, which is a common explanation, but the word wheel in Old Norse is hjol, not yol. You don't, there's no regular process to explain the loss of that age. Um, but it could distantly be related to um, actually the same root that is in the Latin word that becomes joke.
Oh, Yokus or Yoke. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wonder if it's actually just sort of the time of merriment, just the time when you're joking and talking. Basically, it's a word for like feast. And in fact, the word as borrowed into Finnish means feast, not specifically the Yule feast. The original borrowing into Finnish, there's a later borrowing that does mean specifically Christmas. So that's my guess, is actually that it's an old word for feast that becomes specialized to mean that particular one.
Or even something that you've talked about is the Viking word for blue. For quite a while, I mean, people assumed that Vikings. I love that there's this whole school of thought that ancient peoples couldn't see blue. Yes, they could see blue.
Yeah,
They
no,
just, that's nonsense.
well, but that comes from Homer too, because Homer's descriptions of colors are so weird.
We don't even
Um,
know who Homer was. We don't know if it was one
yeah,
person, many people.
this is Homer, okay?
Yes, yes.
Like, but this is understand that this is the same way I'm saying Ulfila, right? Like we
Yes.
yeah, it's a term of convenience. Those poems, their terms for color are weird, right? I mean, like, uh, in fact, I think sometimes, if I'm not mistaken, in the Greek text, it says the something like the wine red sea sometimes,
Yes, yes, that's right. Yes.
which it's like what? Like, what? But but yeah, sure. different languages categorize colors differently. Um, but at some point in the last few decades, it became this matter of faith in Old Norse studies that there's no word for blue in Old Norse. And the basis of that is that they call ravens blue in poetry. They talk about ravens a lot, so this comes up fairly often. It is interesting that in prose, ravens are black, but in poetry, they're blue. And
Is it Blar, I think?
yep,
Yeah.
blower. And my position after reviewing every occurrence of every color term in Old Norse, which is what my PhD dissertation was, then in fact they do distinguish blue from black. And when they call ravens blue in poetry, they're being good poets because look at a raven, they're actually pretty blue and in
Yes.
person.
Yeah.
Um, but they distinguish blue eyes from dark eyes, so that's not black, right? Like that just that in fact, I think that's almost the open and shut. Like if you're distinguishing blue eyes from dark eyes, blue does not mean black.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Um, but also the sky is blue, the sea is often blue. Um, they talk about blue clothes as distinct from black clothes, and uh, archaeological finds do find blue clothes from this period, particularly in graves from Greenland, which often have well-preserved textiles. They have a word for blue. Like it's it is okay that they call ravens blue.
What about Jotun? Is that are they really giants or was that a mistranslation?
Yeah, this is another one of those things where like I think I've talked about this so long, so often for so many years that like I'm always in danger of sort of hitting a groove in my mind where I just sort of replay the same track. This but but this word, which is used for the enemies of the gods, the word itself communicates nothing about size. And relative to the gods, there is no size difference.
Hmm.
Also, relative to the gods, there's no appearance difference because the gods cannot tell someone is a Jotun just from looking at them. Because when the builder shows up to make the wall early in history, they don't know it's a Jotun. I don't know who they think it is, but they don't realize he's a Jotun until he goes into this characteristic Jotun rage. Almost all the gods have one Jotun parent also, so they cannot be that different in species. Now, are they giant relative to human beings? Yeah, I think they might be bigger than us. I think the gods are too, though.
Hmm.
So this is probably this track that I replay. This is probably the biggest modification I've made to that track in the last couple of years. Is like, okay, yeah. They're bigger than we are, but that's not the thing that distinguishes them from the gods, which is who they interact with. Humans don't really interact with Jotuns. Jotuns are like gods. They're, higher, not physically necessarily, but they're they're a higher level of being. And between the Jotuns and the gods, there's no size difference. But when gods appear among human beings, they tend to be very tall, right? So, like in sagas where Odin or Thor or Freya shows up, they are noticeably taller than people. So, probably, yeah, these greater supernatural beings, they are tall, but Jotuns versus gods, there is no distinction in height between those two. I don't think you could visually tell the difference between a good god, one of the Aesir of Vanir, and what's effectively a bad god, an anti-god, a Jotun or Thor's.
On the subject of tracks that you play often, is that I noticed that many people like to comment on the fact that you always say that Old Norse has no word for tattoo.
Well, it doesn't. As far as we know, I guess this is another place where it's like, yeah, you could it could show up, but as much as we depict them as having tattoos today, they
There's
should,
no archaeological evidence for
yeah,
tattoos.
and they should talk about it. They should hear about it. You should hear so and so had a distinctive tattoo if this is such a thing they're doing all the time, right? Because they make fun of people's appearance so much.
Hmm.
There should be nicknames related to it because they pick out individual things that are noticeable about somebody, right? You get nicknames like Bad Tooth, and and like
Well,
Bad
Ivar
Nose,
the boneless, they're
Boneless.
so
Yeah.
visual about these things.
So why don't we have Ivar the Bad Tattoo? You know what I mean? Or or Ivar. wolf on the arm or whatever. Like they should talk about it. It should be mentioned, and it never is. Also, modern Icelandic, at least up to the last couple generations, has been one of the most puristic languages ever in terms of just like reusing Old Norse words for new things.
Mm.
And even in modern Icelandic, the word for tattoo is tattoo, right? Like it is such a foreign thing that they borrow the word. There is also a new coinage by people that didn't like that. They call it húðflúr, skin flower. Um, but like that's transparently a neologism. It's not an Old Norse word. So yeah, they don't have tattoos. The evidence that they do is Ibn Fadlan,
The one guy.
yeah, who says they are tattooed. I think the quote is from finger or from neck to fingertip or fingertip to foot. The book is over there somewhere, but he says they're covered in tattoos. Okay, he saw something. He saw some guys with tattoos, but the people that he encounters are not necessarily Old Norse speaking. They're not necessarily from Scandinavia. He's encountering Rus, who for generations have been interacting with and mixing with Slavic speaking people. They might be speaking Slavic. They might have tattoos because that's a Slavic custom. Or even if we leave aside the question of influence from Slavic or other cultures they're encountering or mixing with, it could just be that some particular subculture somewhere decides to start doing tattooing. I mean, we know from graves on Birka that there were
Tooth
men,
modification.
yeah, that tooth modification thing. Yeah, so like they do have subcultures that are going to do particular things to sort of mark, hey, we're a member of this group.
Yeah,
So
recently
just
they
like,
found the pieces of the skull modification in the front from different peoples.
okay, well,
But
like it
again,
could
no
be,
tattoos.
yeah, but I think that Ibn Fadlan could have encountered a subculture that was using tattoos to mark themselves off.
Mm.
That's a possibility. I don't dismiss the idea that some Vikings had tattoos, but it's that kind of marginal subcultural use. It is not something that is super widespread. And because again, they should talk about it, and they don't.
Yeah, there are other things that are strange. So, for example, in Heimskringla, King Haakon the Good, it's very strange that he is so prevalent, and yet we have no real evidence for him at all.
Håkon?
Yeah, King Haakon,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Håkon, yeah.
Haakon. That's how I know how to spell it. So
Yeah, H-A long A K-O-N, yeah.
yes,
Håkon in Old Norse. Håkon in
I
Iceland.
apologize to everybody who speaks
No,
Old
I
Norse.
was he well, this is another one of those tracks that plays a lot. I'm not an archaeologist. I don't know what the archaeological evidence for him is. He's abundantly literarily attested.
Yes, yeah.
Um, I mean, he's yeah, a major figure, obviously in Heimskringla, but he also shows up in lots of the Icelandic sagas, like Egil Saga. He's a gigantic figure. Um, I think the saga of Gunnlaug Wormtongue also. Like he's part of the established chronology of Norwegian kings in the sagas. I don't know about archaeological evidence for him, but he is absolutely like literarily canon.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, he's fostered by Athelstan in England because another one of his names is Håkon Adelstein's Fostri.
And yet
Um,
in Ethelstan's literature, he's not mentioned at all.
okay, that's interesting. Yeah,
And that's why it's so interesting because you just go, wow, that's really so were they trying to write him into Ethelstan because England was
yeah,
just coming up at the time
yeah,
in the 900s? Why was he so prevalent in Heimskringla, but then in any English literature, he's just completely missing.
yeah. That's interesting. I mean, that suggests that that story of his being fostered by the king is perhaps perhaps fabricated. Um, but you could think of reasons for doing that, right? I mean, at the time, there is a prestige to a foreign court, so yeah, raised at a foreign court, it kind of excuses his foreign custom of Christianity being the earliest Christian king.
Yeah.
Uh,
Was also as well, he's credited, at least in the sagas, he's credited with changing Yule, right?
mhm,
He claims that he moved Yule from its original time, whenever that was, sometime in
mhm.
January maybe, to Christmas. And that's why Yule is known as Christmas. But again, as I say, we have no evidence for him other than his saga life.
And scholarly poetry. There
Oh,
is
he's there too.
contemporary there is contemporary scholarly poetry that mentions it. So my guess is what you're looking at is a real Norwegian king, um, but with a fabricated story of hostage by an English king. Yeah, that would be my guess from what you're telling me about the English sources.
Yeah, it's so
Because you
strange
would
that he would pick Ethelstan, but
just,
yeah, I know.
it's the king at the time, right? That just lined up with the timeline. I guess it's like if I said that I was fostered by a president, I would say it was. I mean, I was born in the Reagan administration, so I guess Reagan, right? It's like not because I'm not because I'm specifically trying to invoke Ronald Reagan, but just because that was the president, so the timeline works out. Like, yes, I was left as a baby at Ronald
You were
Reagan's White
raised by
House.
the ghost of economics past.
Yes, yes. And then I was subsequently fostered by Bush one, Clinton, and Bush two in that sequence. Yeah. But like maybe just because it lines up with the sequence.
Yeah, that's interesting. When it comes to where somebody had a question about the gods, and so asking, is Odin really the All-Father if we can't really know how much of the religion is worship from the Eddas?
No, he's not the All-Father. This also puts me toward one of those tracks. That word, okay, he has a title, Allfather,
Hmm.
but that does not contain the word father. It's here for those who might see this
His
visually.
glasses are going on. That's
Yeah,
it. It's over.
that means reading and writing. Um, so this is father.
Okay. Father
All father.
would
This
be.
compound is attested. Um, I think actually for the Christian God.
Hmm.
So it's just all father. Okay, but Odin has a title that occurs pretty often in poetry, and it's that.
Oh.
So that's not father.
And so
Now,
what does it mean?
so the strongest explanation that I've heard for this, that I think has got to be on the right track, is we have an old Indo-European root for master that shows up, for example, in um, Greek despot. The word becomes English, or is borrowed as English despot. Sanskrit dumpati. So this is house lord, lord of the house.
Hmm.
So Grimm's law, that P should become an F, that T should become th, right? So
Always
we
comes
do,
back to Grimm's Law.
or I'll say Rask's law, just to not give Grimm the credit and credit the the Dane. Um, so Gothic has some compounds that have this. Hundefaths, Lord of 100, right? Centurion. And Bruthfaths, Lord of the Bride, the groom at a wedding. So this word is not otherwise attested in Old Norse, but a very plausible form of it in Old Norse would be father. The
Mm,
vowel is a touch hard to explain unless we assume that it's actually switched noun class and become a U stem, but that's something that happens actually pretty often between Gothic and Old Norse, so I think that this is actually a pretty solid explanation of what this is. He's not all father, he's all lord. Makes sense. More sense than
absolutely.
father, because he's
Yeah.
actually not literally the father of everybody. There's plenty of gods that have different fathers. Njordr, probably Tyr. And we see other names that have this for him. So he's also called Valfather. That's Lord of the Slain. That Val word is the same word that's in like Valkyria, Cheeser of the Slain, Valhall, Hall of the Slain. And he's also called Sigfather. So rather than Father of Victory, that makes him Lord of Victory. So yeah, I think that's a much more plausible explanation. Um, Once I heard this, I pretty much was like, oh yeah, no, that's got to be it. Because then it also makes sense that Snorri writing the prose in the 1200s is seeing this word or hearing this word in poetry. He doesn't really know what this is, but it's like it sounds enough like this He's like,
Mm,
okay, I guess it's father, right? All father. And so he explains it that way. And in the Prose Edda, which we have to remember is a secondary source, even if it's a really old one, he says, okay, he's all father because he's father of everybody. But he contradicts himself because he explains he's actually not the father of everybody. So,
excellent. That's
hey,
fantastic. Wonderful.
that's
So
my
I love the greatest hits. That's always amazing. But I love that it's actually broken down that way. So with all that said, what do you think is the best modern representation of Old Norse and the Norse sagas
um
in any media, movie, game?
yeah, I'm not necessarily the best person in the world to answer this because I haven't seen everything, right? I don't really engage with this stuff for in play. You know what I mean? Like I don't really watch Viking movies or TV shows or play. I don't really play video games at all. So I haven't encountered everything, and I don't read a lot of fiction. Um, or what fiction I read is not about Viking stuff. But I can name a few that I think have done a good job. I think so. There's a series, a trilogy of novels, The Hammer and the Cross by science fiction great Harry Harrison, together with Tom Shippey, writing under a pseudonym. And these are kind of an alternate history of Ragnar Lothbrok and his sons. And pretty good. Tom Shippey does a good job of the Old Norse and the Old English. And the cultural presentation is good, right? It's not it's between these extremes that you get into today where they were just farmers. It's like, yeah, they were pretty violent farmers. And and also the other end of the extreme, which is there's Sparta, right? It's a good middle ground that I think a realistic depiction of a, hyper masculine but not entirely martial society. I think they do a super solid job with those novels. They're probably out of print, but I think you can get them on Kindle or find one for $3 on eBay. Um, you know, I did some consulting on Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the first one, and I thought they did a pretty good job with how they depicted Odin there. And I used to be very complimentary toward the depiction of Odin in American Gods. Um, honestly, the book and the TV show, because I consulted on the TV show, um, is why I'm going to be complimentary. No, actually, Ian McShane did a super job with like the personality of Odin in the TV show, even though nobody saw the TV show. I'm not just saying that because I taught him his Old Norse lines. He's a nice guy, by the way. Um, obviously a lot of stuff has come out about Neil Gaiman, so I don't mean to sound too complimentary about him. Also, I thought that his Norse mythology book sucked, which was sort of fascinating because American Gods was pretty good in its portrayal of Norse gods, and then he like just the Norse mythology book, he makes up so much stuff.
Yep.
But for whatever reason, I guess because he's famous, even with the allegations against him, that book has become like the new. It's what everybody's read now, and some people just love the hell out of it. And I'm like, I don't know.
I
I
did not love the hell out of it. I read maybe half it and I went, not for me.
yeah. Even before I knew about the allegations about
Yeah,
him,
book came out long before. That book came out
yeah.
long before. Yeah.
But I was actually really hesitant to criticize it publicly to people because people loved it so much. And then
Oh no,
because
you
I
should
don't,
have. It's good press for you and your books.
yeah, I should have much earlier because,
You can still do it now. There's still time.
well, no, because by the time that I did decide to make a comment about it, all those allegations had come out. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So I started talking about the book. People were like, actually, he sucks. I'm like, oh, okay, well, this
Yes,
is,
good. Vindication.
yeah.
Amazing.
Well, I'm late to this party now.
That's how it is. If you're not in one circle, another, you're late to the party. Yeah, that's how it always is, though, with publishing. It's like fiction doesn't talk to nonfiction, nonfiction doesn't talk to fiction. You are
Yeah,
quoted, by the way, in my upcoming book about the history of holidays. And
yeah.
I do use your dissertation on the word Yule as and a lot of your ideas about when Yule might have been in the book.
Dissertation. You don't mean like PhD decision. You mean like my my long talk about it.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I have to say that's not my dissertation. Okay, well, cool. I'm flattered.
So
Um,
speaking of which, how do you go about, because I think your translations are lauded as the best, and I do think they're the best. So how do you go about translating something, especially something, let's say like Havamal, which is a little bit different. Your translation is a little bit different than
hmm.
what maybe people would normally expect.
I don't know who lauds these things as the best, but
I
I'm
do.
flattered. Well, thank you. I'm flattered. Well, Havamal, I mean, there's the cowboy Havamal, which is really different,
Yes.
but I also did a normal translation of it, and the first version of that appeared in the first edition of my Poetic Edda translation in 2015, and then a revised version appeared in 2019, um, in the Wanderer's Havamal, and then that same revised version is in the second edition of the Poetic Edda. And also in the second edition of the Poetic Edda, I revised all the other poems to the standards of that later translation of Havamal. So my translation philosophy changed somewhat over the intervening 10 years between the first and the second edition of the Poetic Edda. Um, Most of what's changed about my translation philosophy in those years has been I am less bothered by gaps and confusion in the original text. I am more willing to present a text with gaps and confusion to you, the reader, and just be like, yeah, here it is. I don't know what this means either, than try to make it make sense when it doesn't, right? Like, if I have a really good guess about what something means, sure, yeah, I'll put it in there. But if I don't know what the hell this is, I'm not just going to make up some explanation for it. And then also, I became stricter about how I translate certain words. So, for example, in the second edition of the Poetic Edda, if it says God, the Old Norse text says God. If it says Aesir, the Old Norse text says Aesir. I want you to actually see what the difference
Hmm.
in usage is. It's not clear what the system is between the difference in usage, but I want you to see it. Um, Certain words that I changed. I used to translate Jotun as giant because everybody did, but it also started to really bother me that I was sort of assisting in this persistent myth that they're bigger than the gods. So I started just translating it as Jotun, right? I just leave it alone because I figure if you're into Norse myth, you probably know that word anyway. Um, but mostly, there's a big continuum in attitude with translation, and there's a very, very to use a word you used earlier, pedantic attitude that you could take, where you could say, I want every single word to be reflected by a single word in the resulting translation. And what you get from that is effectively not translation because, first of all, word order is really different, and you can make phrases that are super confusing in English that aren't confusing in the original if you do that. There are translators, of course, that work that way. I mean, famously, Wolfila, translating the Gothic Bible basically just does word by word from Greek, and so the syntax probably is not very reflective of Gothic syntax in some respects. Um, there are some translators today, Anthony Falks, who really knows what he's doing, um, translates very close to this end of the continuum. I don't find that super readable in English, but it makes for very technically correct translations, um, which is why I tend to recommend his prose edit translation in the absence of one done in my style, i.e., mine thus far. Um, but what am I doing when I'm looking at a text and translating it? Uh, I would like you to look at a stanza in the original and a stanza in my translation and say, I see where he got all of this. And he didn't add anything that didn't need to be added just to make it a sentence in English. Um, or occasionally maybe to fill in some abundantly obvious context thing that would have been abundantly obvious to the original audience and not to us. Um, I don't have a great example of that off the top of my head, um, but like working on the prose edit right now, as I occasionally am doing, um, I'm looking at the Old Norse text, and rather than word by word, it's more sentence by sentence, right? What does this say? how can I put the same picture in the English reader's mind as appears in the Old Norse reader's mind from reading this sentence is kind of what I'm going for there. This can be tough with something like the Prose Edda, where Snorri is often explaining Old Norse words.
Hmm.
So it's like, and that's why we have this word. It's like, okay, so I have to actually tell you, the English speaker, by the way, this means this. So I do have to add context there. But other than adding context, I want yeah, again, the picture in your mind from that sentence to be the same in English as it would be from the Old Norse.
And so is that what you're working on next? Is another edition of the Poetic Edda?
Now, the second edition of the Poetic Edda is out. Um,
Oh, sorry. I meant the prose edda because the Poetic Edda, the second edition. Yeah, that's the one with the very nice cover. No, no Aurora. Very beautiful. Very nice. I
yeah,
actually
we
tried
abandoned
to
the
get a
Aurora
copy of
thing.
that at the bookstore, and it was sold out for weeks
Oh,
in a
really?
row. Yeah,
Yeah, we abandoned the Aurora thing. It's also got this cool raven.
beautiful. Yeah, so that's the
Thing.
second edition, revised, expanded edition.
Super, super revised, super expanded. Yeah, that came out about a year ago. So yeah, I unfortunately I simply don't know what book is coming next, and that makes some people scream, but I have submitted what is basically a complete manuscript of my Old Norse textbook
Oh, nice.
to Hackett. And I don't know where that is in the production stage, and I haven't heard back from the peer reviewers, but I feel like that can't be that far from getting published.
Oh, that's wonderful. When it's out or when you're doing your cycle, please come back and tell us about it. That'd be
Thank you.
amazing.
I just haven't like really heard anything, so I
Oh,
don't
I
know.
know. I
But
put in my History of Holidays book last year when I finished it and then didn't hear anything for 6 months. And they went, "Oh yeah, we're
yeah,
gonna hang on to this for another year." And I went, "Okay, so when's the publication date?" And they're like, "Oh, next year, December." And I went, "Okay."
yeah, okay. Well, so you can relate to this particular anxiety that you get where it's like, I just haven't heard what is
Yeah.
going on with this. And then the prose edit is contracted with Hackett, and it's just a really, really slow project. Right. I
So
mean, I pay my bills with videos, so I can't be constantly doing this.
as do we all, as we're
Yeah.
authors. That's how it is. 36 books, I still haven't paid a bill.
Yeah, yeah. You've made some tweets, or do we call them skeets now?
Oh, I don't even
That are so
know.
relatable about this, where it's like, yeah, you think I'm putting food on my table with books? It's like
My
that's
bestseller is my children's book about one of my children's book, Werewolves Don't Celebrate Hanukkah. And I wrote that as a joke with my friend John. And that is still the one that sells rather
you just
than
don't know. You
you've
never
no
know what it's going
idea.
to be. But it's the
As
same
I,
with videos,
yep. Yeah, you have no
right?
idea. You could throw whatever video as these videos, we have them mostly on podcast format. They do very well in podcast format, but people wanted the video. Some videos do amazingly well and get, 20,000 views, and others just have 100 views, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's just how it is,
But
you know?
I'll put up two videos like a week apart, and one I like sweated over every detail
Uh-huh.
that nobody watches it, and one is just like, you know, hey, anyway, hi, and it's like 50,000 views. I'm like, what? You know,
It's because people assume that either you're leaving the channel, you have something new to announce, or it's just how it is. But
um,
for the 500 people who will watch this video, because there will probably be many more on the listening, the Poetic Edda, the second edition, second revised expanded edition is out now, and obviously, I think the best one that you have, I love Cowboy, I have them all, but
yeah.
there's the Wanderers have them all, which is very very beautiful edition out as well. So I hope that you help Dr. Jackson Crawford put some food on his table.
Yeah, I might buy an Epic bar or something.
Yeah,
No, it's
I shared this because it was Dr. Francis Young who shared he's got like a bajillion books and he doesn't have to teach anymore. So he writes, like 4 or 5 books a year. And he just showed his receipt on how much he's received from every book, and it's all zeros all the way down except for one of them, which is I bought three copies.
oh my God. Well, but it's the same thing, like, and it's not just sort of our domain. Um, I have friends who are, professional comedians and they write like
Hmm.
comedy books, right? And it's like it's the same deal.
It's
Like
the same thing.
the only statements they're getting are the statements that say, in 600 years, at this rate, you will make $100, you know?
Yes. Yes. So what you're saying is I should put a penny in a savings account and like Doctor Who, just wait 500 years. I'll do
Yeah,
well.
yeah. Just wander into the frozen Canadian North and put yourself in cryogenic preservation.
I hate to tell you, I don't know how long we're gonna have that frozen north.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But hopefully before hell freezes over, or is hell already cold, we'll of course depending on your mythological depiction, hell is already cold. There's frozen fire somewhere. But thank you so much for giving us so much of your time.